The Community Law Centre was established at a very critical point in South Africa's history. It was in 1990 when negotiations started about drafting a new democratic constitution for the country. And two matters that were very relevant then was one, a Bill of Rights, limited government, and the second one was the form of the state. How should it be constituted? So right from the beginning, the centre was interested in human rights.
Your interest in decentralisation and federalism and the work you've done in South Africa, was that the stepping stone towards engagement with other African countries and their decentralisation reforms? To what extent, in other words, did your experience with South Africa help provide a stepping stone towards understanding the politics of constitutional reform and change in other countries that were going through democratic reforms? Did South African experience help you with your work in Kenya, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Ethiopia and Zimbabwe and other African countries?
I think it was key to our understanding of what is occurring elsewhere and what lessons, if any, could be learned from the South African experience. The first one was that we had a very centralized system of devolution. And the fear was, when the constitution was drafted, that if one impose a federal system, you would unleash centrifugal forces. And so we've seen a number of mechanisms which led to the South Africa only having some federal elements, but a strong central control. Now, this very same problem or concern about federalism is prevalent in the rest of Africa. The fear that once a truly federal system is implemented, you would lead to the secession, and already the example is there of South Sudan. So on the basis of the experience in South Africa, how to work with a dominant political party, how to accommodate differences but not entrench ethnicity, and that was one of the great, innovations that South Africa brought to the fore. It could in fact establish a federal type system, but without linking it directly to ethnicity or linguistic groups. This is then in stark contrast to Ethiopia, which built its federal system on the basis of ethnicity. When we worked in the DRC, again, a system of devolution was planned, and there our expertise was used to develop some of the laws to give effect to their system of devolution. Their 24 provinces, their communes, the municipalities, and the way in which power is divided between these various levels of government. In Kenya, I think South Africa played an enormous role, or the South African Constitution played a big role. If you look at the Kenyan Constitution, you would see chunks of the South African Constitution being replicated in the Kenyan Constitution. This is to do with the division of powers, the allocation of fiscal powers, even the institutions such as the Commission of Revenue Allocation is basically based on the South African Financial and Fiscal Commission. So the Kenyans saw great similarities with the South African system because it wasn't a full-blown federal system. It could accommodate strong centralist sentiments in Kenya, together with the belief that through devolution you could bring development down to grassroots. Whereas before, all development and activities were centered in Nairobi in the center, devolution had the explicit intention of spreading devolution throughout the country by creating in Kenya 47 counties. The other aspect of devolution, which has not come very strongly through in South Africa as well as in the rest of Africa, is that devolution is also aimed at being a brake on rampant centralism and often the abuse of power at the center. So we can see that in the changes that was affected to the Zimbabwean constitution, it remains a very centralist constitution. There is talk, or there's text on creation of new provinces, or of provinces and metropolitan provinces in their two big cities, but in effect it is still very strongly controlled by the center.
Do you see all the promises of federalism and decentralization being met in the countries where reforms were undertaken in terms of a more democratic system, better functioning public policy, development of local communities, a way to balance the center of, because the record in some of the other cases seems to suggest that not all the promises have been met. I wonder if you took a sort of a big perspective and looked back, how much of the promises have a scorecard that is always positive, and if not, can you sort of, for our students, tell us maybe where the reasons for inefficiencies or problems might be?
If we start with South Africa, what is the scorecard after 20 years of devolved government? At the provincial level, we have a very mixed scorecard. We have provinces that have been termed failed states in the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. You've got provinces where value is added, Gauteng, Western Cape. So it's difficult to generalize, but what you also found was, why was the failure there? Why isn't it been uniformly a success story? One is that you also, as you devolve power, you also devolve corruption. And so corruption has become a major problem in provinces, but also further down in local government. The capturing of decentralized units by local elites. That is not to say that corruption only occurs at the provincial or local government. It is always true of the national government as well. So it is, I think, unfair to say, has devolution been a success, without asking, has the national government been a success? And in Africa, national governments has often been not successful, often showing state failure, and so one would not expect the same to happen at provincial or local government level. Just a nice example is we can show that when a provincial government does not have a clean audit for its own department of local government, the municipalities that resort under such a provincial department would also not have clean audits. So don't expect too much from local government to solve the problems that the central government can't solve. The other problem, of course, is decentralized or devolution has been where government did not exist before. You had to create, in most places in Africa, new institutions where none existed before. It is not like a classic federation where pre-existing institutions, countries, come together to form a union. Here there was a central government where all power and personnel and skills were centered. Now you have to create new institutions from scratch to service the outlying areas. And so there's always been a huge capacity constraint that occurs. Further problem has been that there has seldom been a real commitment from the center to make devolution work. It's always been a battle about and seen by the national governments as a zero-sum game. If subnational governments, like provinces or states, get power, it's at the national expense. So it was never a full endorsement of this is the way that the country should be going. There has always been a tussle, a contestation about whether it's a good idea in the first place. So in South Africa, provinces were never given or fully endorsed or embraced by the African National Congress, who wanted a very centralized state in order to transform South Africa. The same, one can say, is happening in Kenya, where there's still a lot of opposition to the notion of decentralization or devolution to counties. What we also see, say, in Ethiopia is that although you, on paper and structure, may devolve powers, you can keep control at the center through the political party. And this is very strong in Ethiopia, but also a case in South Africa, where the ANC controls 8 of the 9 provinces. So, to give a big picture of devolution in the rest of Africa, South Africa included, it doesn't present a rosy picture and say this is the silver bullet that is going to solve underdevelopment. It has to be a joint task of the national and the subnational government to achieve that.
Thank you.